Dad always used to say the only causes worth fighting for were the lost causes.
The Senator yield. No, sir, I will not yield.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
You're listening to a Pyrolitical Pyrocast.
Hello and welcome to the Pyrocast presented by Pyrolitical Radio Show. Hey everyone, I'm Thomas.
And I'm Randall.
We've got some great topics tonight. Randall, we've been discussing what we're going to cover. Why don't you give us a breakdown of that?
Well, we've been talking about what freedom is not.
What freedom is not.
Cliffhanger. We may also get into a little bit of the proper rule of law. Or do we need to break the law to catch lawbreakers? I think that's
talk about breaking the law to keep the law.
Right. So we got a few. I mean, besides the what's going on in the world today, but the main thing is principles. We need to focus on the principles. That's what makes things matter.
That's right. There goes Randall with the P word again. That's what we focus on. We can't help it. P word stands for Pyrolitical and Principles. So before we get into this, we just want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Pyrolitical Live. And there's over 20 episodes of the Pyrocast there, so they're all an hour long, and you can go and get a lot of meat. We are somewhat topical, Randall, but we're not a news show per se. What we try to do is make it relevant by referencing some topics, but then the principles we try to help people to surpass that just blatant talk radio, focus on the issues view all the time, because that never ends. Randall.
No,
it never
always
ends.
I mean, that's what causes us to have. I mean, like Wolf Blitzer when he says, "Oh, well, we're the first revision of history," right? Because he sees something that's going on and. They're going to announce it. They're going to talk about it. Their report may be completely unfactual, but we're going to talk about it anyway because we need to fill 24 hours worth of news. And same thing, Fox News, all the 24-hour news channels, they do that same thing. They're trying to come up with headlines and stingers and whatever to get people to tune in and stay tuned in so they can sell ads. And that's not important. All those little things. I mean, that's like how many people listening to our show or watching us on YouTube, tune into like TMZ or read People Magazine or any of these things. They do the same thing, but just with movie stars and TV stars and whatever instead of politics. But that's what Fox News and CNN and whatever tends to be, not 100%, but the vast majority of it. When dealing with politics, it's TMZ for politics.
Right. And Randall, I was going to the convenience store today, and I almost regularly only catch the news every week when we do this on Wednesdays. And I don't listen to talk radio the rest of the time because I can't handle hearing the same things like the Comey firing and now he's testifying, or the Russian impact on the election. So unless it's super important, like the bailouts where it's like they're going to be passed in 7 days, we need to make a stink or hold a rally, I only listen once a week. And so listening today, I was just like, this never ends. It's the deluge of minutia as far as politics go. And it's so irrelevant to me except for what I'm going to present to other people. So I just get really tired of it. Super tired of it.
Is it any wonder that so many voters have tuned off or they've tuned out? They don't want, there's so much information about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and so much happening back there. And we just throw it at you, true or untrue. There's just so much of it that you run into people all the time who are like, I tried to be involved, but there's just too much. There's too much going on. I don't know enough. I try to stay informed, but I always feel like there's never enough that I understand. And I think it's part of that. These people get overwhelmed with all this minutia, as you pointed out, all this stuff that really doesn't matter. As important as Comey's testimony is, as important as it may be to find out whether Russia really tried to hijack our election, as important as it may be to know, whatever political fact or political idea, the principle overrules the issue of the day. Because if you understand the principle, then you're able to look at it and say, wait a second. I really either shouldn't be listening to this, or I need to take whatever's being said with a grain of salt. Because
giant grain.
No, just the teeniest of grains.
No.
And just understand that, whatever's happening may not even matter. It's just something to fill the airwaves. It's something to make us question whether we have the power and ability to affect change. When we rely on principles of good government, all those distractions can just go away. They don't matter anymore.
Well, I was listening to a conservative talk show host, a woman today, and she was talking about this NSA whistleblower, this leaker. That sounds funny. But anyway, she was so angry about, we need to stand up for the country. We need to support the security apparatus, the FBI, CIA, and so on and so forth, the NSA. And I just thought the principle is the Fourth Amendment is being violated on a daily basis to millions and millions of Americans. And also in every state, there's an article in a section, I'm sure, where there's a equivalency of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. I know in Utah there is this Article 1, Section 14, I think, which says that we are to be secure in our effects and our papers and all that. But here's this conservative talking head, and she's so angry that this leaker gave away classified information. And I just thought, the principle is don't let the government spy on you. But if you're caught in the rigmarole of left and right politics, it's like you're going to take not a principled stand against surveillance and spying. You're just going to be like, oh, they didn't serve the military. Because she said in the same conversation, the military is the backbone of our freedom. And it's like, are you sure about that? And is it really a bad thing that information's being leaked? So the principles will help you see your way through those choppy waters.
Yeah, so many people hear that argument and then they say, well, if you have nothing to hide, then why should it matter? Well, but those same people would probably talk about how great they thought the founders were for having the initial revolution of 1776, and fighting the British. And some of those issues were fundamental. But now we say, well, in the interest of security and safety and fighting terror or whatever, it's necessary for us to give up some of these liberties. And the founders would just they are rolling in their graves literally and saying, what are you people doing? What are you people doing? I mean, really, you're giving up the fundamental foundation of freedom, which is to be safe and secure in your rights and property and whatever, not having whatever entity to just run roughshod over the top of you.
Right.
That the individual has and should always have more power than the state, as long as we don't give it up by, committing murder or whatever, violating those laws. If you're a law-abiding citizen, it's not a matter of whether you have anything to hide. It's a matter of whether it's just for the government to come in and get a look at your crap, whatever it is. Is it their right? No.
Hey, you got to watch your language, Randall. Your daughter prayed that I wouldn't say any bad words tonight on the broadcast.
Sorry,
Seriously, she did.
I just said crap.
I need those prayers. I do. And so did the American people. They need prayers to stand up for principles. Randall, I was reading in the book, The Real George Washington, last night, and they were talking about when George was getting beat and the British made their way into Philadelphia, which was not only a strategic victory, but it was really a symbolic victory, being the nation's capital.
Right.
And when the British got into Philadelphia, all the Tories came out and they celebrated, and they showed, you know, how much they appreciated the British. And I'm like, here's George Washington fighting for freedom and principle, and yet the citizens he's fighting for are completely, they're so disconnected with what's right and freedom, and we're going to talk about freedom, that they don't care. They just want comfortability. They just want an easy life.
They want what they're familiar with.
Yeah.
And that's understandable. But, you know, some people may try to compare what George Washington did, you know, fighting for freedom in amongst people who didn't want the war to go on. They wanted to stay British, and compare that with rabble-rousers in today's day and age, like maybe Rivera or you know, whoever, Che Guevara, that's what I was thinking, or someone like that, you know. But it's totally different. You know, if there was someone, a fellow U.S. colonist who was opposed to what George Washington was doing, George Washington wouldn't send out the thugs to beat him up and force him to give up his property or force him to support it. You know, they tried to stay within the realm of what was legally capable for them to do, right? Not just run roughshod over individual liberties. And that's the fundamental difference. You know, you have some of these today, or in the last 100 years even, who they try and have a popular uprising or whatever, and then you find them abridging the rights of other individuals who don't support them. And you're like, wait a second. No. You know, this is not the case. They're not a George Washington. They're not fighting for freedom. They're fighting for power.
They're fighting to withhold or to conserve. There we go. Zing. What they have. And the Declaration of Independence said, while evils are sufferable, while you can tolerate them, no matter how bad it gets. Randall, you sent me this quote about freedom, and I want to share that because it was awesome. So I'm going to take the credit for the quote when you found it.
You're
There's
welcome.
this guy named P.J. O'Rourke, and he's quite good. He writes books, and he's pretty funny, but he says, quote, freedom is not empowerment. Empowerment is what the Serbs have in Bosnia. Anybody can grab a gun and be empowered. So, pausing there, Randall, what that made me think of is how the U.S. government has empowered Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS, Mujahideen,
Spreading
Turkey,
freedom.
Saudi Arabia, all kinds of Middle Eastern countries, and so on and so forth. In fact, well, we had companies and government in World War I and II empowering powers over there on both sides. So the point is, freedom is a condition and the ability to enjoy your fundamental rights. Empowerment means maybe the U.S. government gave you money or guns. I mean, we gave Iraq, I think, $6 billion or $12 billion not too long ago. That's empowering to the bad guys.
Well, and I don't think it's just
not freedom.
Guns. You know, you have a lot of beliefs of U.S. citizens that they've been empowered by the government to be able to do certain things, right? They may have part of this endless list of rights. I think you're going to talk about that here in just a second too. But I think they feel empowered because they feel like they've got these rights, which aren't rights. You read that part.
Well, he says that it's not entitlement. He says an entitlement is what people will forget. And how free are they? It's not an endlessly expanding list of rights. The right to education, the right to food and housing, that's not freedom, that's dependency. Those aren't rights. Those are rations of slavery. I love that. The rations of slavery. Hay in a barn for human cattle. There is only one basic human right. The right to do as you beep, well, please. See, I censored myself. And it comes with the only basic human duty, to the duty to take the consequences. So I love that. It's very, very clear on what it is.
Now, this kind of dovetails with our conversation from last week, which was all about self-reliance, you know, accountability, being able to be accountable for your choices. I think that is fundamental to the pursuit of freedom. You just can't have it. Like here, freedom is not empowerment. It's not entitlement. It's not this list of rights that the government dispenses. It is one thing, and that is the ability to choose, liberty and the protection of that liberty. And then, being accountable for those choices, not saying, oh, you know what, I really made a really bad choice. I built my house right next to this this river that floods all the time, and so FEMA, come bail me out and bail me out and bail me out, and then eventually we're not going to bail you out anymore, so you got to move somewhere else. I mean, it's just like that's not freedom. That's not freedom. I mean, and it's not self-reliance to say you're not going to depend on anyone else. We talked this last week. If you wonder about that, go listen to the last week's broadcast, because that was
go check that out, because that was awesome.
But that's fundamental, making that choice, that decision to say, you know what, I made a bad choice, and I'm not going to force my neighbor, whoever that may be, to be responsible for that decision. It was mine. I own it. Right. That's important. You can't have freedom without that.
No, and PJ O'Rourke has another great quote which illustrates this even shorter and clearer. He says, if you think healthcare is expensive now, wait until you see what it costs when it's free.
Yeah.
So empower the American people to get a socialized system, then it becomes very, very expensive. So that is clearly the difference between empowerment and freedom. And so one other thing he says is the Democrats are the party that says government will make you smarter, taller, richer, and remove the crabgrass on your lawn. The Republicans are the party that says government doesn't work, and then they get elected and prove it. So one side's socialist, the other side's fascist, and I know those are broad strokes, but that honestly shows you that the difference in freedom is not a left and right thing. It's like Reagan said, it's an up and down thing. Principles are either true or they're not true, or they're somewhere in between, and you can pick out the pieces that aren't. So anyway, so if you're just joining us, we're quoting P.J. O'Rourke, and he said there's only one basic human right, the right to do as you well please, and it comes from the only basic human duty, the duty to take the consequences. I love that. So simple and so clear.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to know what he started out with, at least when I send over to you. Many people attempt to destroy the word freedom, attempt to make thoughts of freedom unthinkable, by making the word meaningless, by applying it to anything and everything. I mean, that's what you hear in the world today. We've got our freedom to do this, our freedom to do that, blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what? That's not freedom. All these things, and just like that last part that you were reading, they're not rights. They're entitlements. They're distinctions. They're classifications, but they're not rights. And that's the thing, is anything like that, you go and like healthcare or internet. I mean, some municipalities want to make internet a right of the people who live in their city, or whatever. And internet is not a right. It is a technology. You have the freedom and ability to contract with some company that has the service, so you can provide it. They can provide it to you. That's where freedom comes in, but it's a service. When a government tries to take over and make it, we have a great example, and some listeners may not love this example, especially if you live up in northern Utah. But there's this whole fiber network called Utopia. And it was. Utopia was supposed to be fantastic, this great fiber network, fast speeds to the house. In order to make it happen, there was a private company that was contracted by these municipalities to bring this technology in, and it was always running over budget, behind schedule, because they had to provide it to everyone, not just people who actually were giving them money. They had to make sure that the infrastructure was there for everything, because it was all of a sudden provided by the city. And
well, it reminds me of UTA, same deal.
but that's the thing, is it because people were seeing it as something that was being provided by government, which is owned by the people. it was impossible for them to create a quality service, that actually lived up to what everybody was saying. I mean, there were some people who were super excited about it, but most people waited for months and months or years in order to get the service. And then once they did, they were plagued with issues because the company at that point in time was basically on the dole. They were on the welfare system.
Well, because
the government
Google
was. Sorry,
isn't Google taking over that service and all of the lines?
Yes. Now I don't know.
Probably makes some money.
No, I hope they do. And I don't know what their relationship is with the cities at this point in time. I think they've moved it out of the municipality having control over it at all, which at that point in time, that allows Google to be able to roll it out a little bit better, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that. But what I do know is that at its inception and, through most of its tenure, it's been a joke. And that's what happens with government. I mean, how many people look at healthcare today and say, I've got better healthcare than I had before? And, if you're a Democrat, you blame the Republicans and what they wouldn't allow to be in Obamacare or what they're now trying to do with Obamacare. And if you're a Republican, then you look at the Democrats and say, well, it's because they brought it up in the first place that it's happened. But neither one is having the discussion about the fact that it's managed care, which started way back in the 60s or before, that really led us to the point where we are now, where the government had their fingers in everything and required all this red tape that got us to the point where we're like, oh, we need the government to save us. And now the government's screwing it all up. Like you said, what does healthcare look like when it's free? It's a mess. It costs so much more. It's not free. It's not free.
Well, I was looking at Utopia specifically, and there's some posts from 2007, and it said, "Get Utopia now." And then I looked down a few, and it says, "Utopia sucks. The upload speed sucks. Everything sucks." But this is another thing PJ O'Rourke said he says, the free market is ugly and stupid, like going to the mall. The unfree market is just as ugly and just as stupid, I'd say more, except there is nothing in the mall, and if you don't go there, they shoot you. Government. This guy's funny. I got to read more about him. So,
well, have you I don't know. I saw this documentary that they were talking about all these I don't know what you'd call them mega cities, but they're all these developments that China's been putting in, including these massive malls. And most of it's been, partially because they're trying to anticipate, right? The government is trying to anticipate the demand of an emerging middle class in China. So they're trying to create all this middle class or upper class living space and malls and things where millions of people are going to spend time, but they're doing it without any of the demand, but it's to help prop up the system, right? They got to spend the money into the system so they can employ all these people that need jobs. So you have literally hundreds of completely empty spaces, malls that just look amazing, and they maybe have hundreds and hundreds of shopping spaces, right? Store spaces, and one or two of them have tenants.
Yeah, but you know what's happening with those? I heard this program about this. Are you surprised, Randall? I listen to radio a lot. I heard that they are starting to convert malls because so many of them are going out of business. They're converting malls into Hispanic centers because Hispanics like to spend time together as groups. And I don't want to stereotype, but I'm going to.
In China?
No, here in the USA. And so they're converting those into Spanish cultural centers with all of these Spanish stores, and they're really picking up and making money. In fact, there was this company CEO on the program. He had taken 3 full malls and converted them into Spanish centers, and free market's alive and well with the Spanish in America. So I don't know. Maybe it's a white thing. We like to stay in our homes and watch Netflix.
Anglo crowd, where we want to watch Netflix and shop on Amazon. We don't want to go out. We're too lazy. and the Hispanic community wants to get together and hang out, and we're like, just
we want to
I'll talk to you on Facebook, right?
We want to Netflix and chill, and we want to post pictures on social media that make us look awesome.
A picture of our feet while we're watching Netflix, yeah.
Yeah, and while we're at the pool, I posted this meme a few weeks ago
freedom?
I posted this meme a few weeks ago, and there's flames at the bottom part, and then there's this wife and husband, and she's a babe, and she's kind of on the ground, and then the husband, he's all buff, and he's on top of this giant mouse with the gun, and it said, may your real life be as awesome as you pretend it is on social media. So nothing to do with what we're talking about, but yeah.
But that's interesting, and maybe this isn't completely on topic, but I mean, whatever is. But
everything.
I've seen a couple reports talked about recently where they talk about the fact that the more that we become interconnected with social media, the less happy individuals tend to be. And part of it is that individuals see what other people are posting and they start playing the compare game, and those guys are so much more awesome than I am. The other side of that is that people try and find things to post that are a lot more exciting or interesting than what their actual life is like. And like you were saying, like riding the mouse or whatever. And then it's just a disconnect. You're not really connecting with people. You may have thousands of friends, but that doesn't mean that you have any sort of a relationship. Right. And that lack of relationship with individuals is leading to a much lower, satisfaction. That's not exercising your freedom necessarily.
No.
You want the right to Facebook. You want the right to the internet.
I want the right to look amazing through my social media
What
profile.
if we took away the right, so-called, to education? What would that look like?
Oh, it'd be amazing. I think you'd see what's going to happen under government management in the free market over the next 50 years. I think you'd accomplish that in 10. You're complaining about flying cars and hoverboards and all that stuff. Dude, you would see stuff that just... In fact, I think over the last 100 years, as we started the space race and as government regulated the free trade deals and all that, I just thought, who knows where we would be if... Well, it's like this guy says, every government is a parliament of whores. Trouble is, in a democracy, the whores are us. We've bought into these lies, these government welfare programs, and what we've done is we have, in the free market that still exists, we are choking through lawsuits and through government programs and regulations. We are choking what little remains of the true free market, and so it's like doing drugs. You get high in the now, you feel great in the now, but over time, you're sick and you'll die. And that's what we're doing as a nation in every generation since the World War I generation on up. We bought into endless war. We bought into government programs. We bought into regulations. And so that's why I won't say it again because I got to be good language tonight.
So then what is the purpose of education? If we're talking about education as a right, what is the purpose of it?
The purpose of it is to accomplish whatever your natural gift is. And you can put that in the free market so that people with the invisible hand that lines up with your gift can take advantage of that. It's like in the old days, you had a mentor and you did an apprenticeship. And you could choose different apprenticeships sometimes, but basically you would choose what you wanted to become. And after several years, I know a lot of apprenticeships were 7 years, like Benjamin Franklin's was 7 years. But the point is you trained to become an owner. And the Georgicness, if you've ever heard the term Georgics, that's critical because that meant you were going to be an owner. And being an owner, even if you were poor, still give you a lot more freedom and empowerment than what we have today when we live in cities and we're in apartment buildings and we're employees. Think about this, Randall. I was thinking about the market has expanded to where we have these multinational corporations. Let's think about Starbucks or let's think about the grocery store. Now, if you're young a teenager or whatever, getting jobs at those places is okay. But when I go into Walmart and other places where there's middle-aged or older adults and they're working these low-skill labor jobs, it's like that's what's happened to us due to the free market. The government has empowered certain corporations to become huge. So all you can do for that corporation, you can't own it or even a piece of it in a lot of senses, is
and stock
do labor.
options are not really ownership. Whatever it may sound like.
No, by the time you get stock options, it's, as a peon, if it shifts a little bit, you don't own enough stock to see any real profit.
Well, but I guess
you're like
going
the
back,
second founder of Microsoft.
Going back to that question though, what is the purpose of education? I think you gave a pretty good answer about what may be the actual purpose of education. But what is the purpose of education that we see in the world around us, government education specifically? I mean, the vast majority of people are educated in government education systems.
Yes.
Not public education, but government education. And so I see that's primarily the role of education is to help make sure that these youths, they acquire some knowledge, whether that's, arithmetic, reading, writing, arithmetic, those basic things, but then they're also conditioned to know and understand these basic facts, if you will. This is the way things work in the world, and make sure that they come off the assembly line basically identical. And if you don't match the mold, you could be shunned, you could be sent into special ed because you just don't match up with the mold, whatever it may be. But I think, and so there's that thought that education is a right. And so if it's a right, government should be providing it. And as a result, then you only get the education that the government will allow you to have. And that's not freedom. That may be empowerment because you feel like you're empowered. You know facts and figures, and you got the piece of paper that said you finished high school and went on to college and got the big loan so you could continue through school, and got your other piece of paper that said you sat in your seat a lot and
Sure.
did reports and whatever. But that's not necessarily freedom. There's a great TED Talk by I can't remember his first name, but it's Khan. His last name's Khan, anyway, of Khan Academy, because he's built an entire online school system based on mastery. He just thinks that this idea of an individual who, like in math, you take a class in math and you practice something and you take a test on it, and all of a sudden you get 50%, right? And that means you didn't understand 50% of what was on the test, but we don't stop and help you learn that 50%. You go on to the next topic, which probably builds on what you don't know 50% of, and then you're just set up for failure, right? And even if you get them, there's going to be gaps in their understanding, even if you get them up to test better on the next test. And his system is entirely based on mastery. So you practice, and then you master a subject, and you completely understand the subject before you move on to the next topic. Is the way, and it's, technology allows us to be able to tailor. Years and years ago, they tried to make a system where it was individually tailored to the kids, but there was no way to do it without technology. But now with technology, you can say, okay, this is as far as you are, so you work on your bit. He'll work on his bit. This guy's ahead. This guy's behind. It doesn't matter because everyone's where they're supposed to be.
Well, the crazy thing, you talk about technology. The crazy thing is with the internet and its disbursement, one of the big challenges over the last 2 or 3 generations is that the huge increase, especially in minority communities like black communities, where you have reportedly 7 out of every 10 birth is a single parent.
Right.
You think that with technology, we could kind of solve the issue of, the government has to shuttle people around and the government has to educate and feed them. You'd think that now it would be more convenient, and it should be. But I want to share something with you, Randall, because you got me percolating from
Nice.
Karl Marx, and this is an important thing because you asked what is the purpose of the government education system. So here's what Karl Marx said in 1833, I believe. He said, "Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you say, we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education, but rather they seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class." This is the last thing he says. "The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed co-relation of parents and child, becomes all the more disgusting the more by the action of modern industry all the family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder and their children transformed in simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor." Now, I find that hilarious that Karl Marx, who was a huge advocate of government education, which is our overwhelming system, said that the home education has turned family ties torn asunder and children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. When the exact opposite is true, especially about homeschool, or any parents in government school or private school who teach their kids about industry, entrepreneurialism, consequences, sowing and reaping, all that stuff. Karl said the opposite. And I think that's what he did, because so many of the people who created this school system in the 1930s and 40s, like Horace Mann and Thomas Dewey, were all about taking all of the responsibility and all the opportunity for parents to teach principles to their kids. And they created this massive system. So it's not about, like we said earlier, fulfilling your purpose within the world and in the free market. It's all about conveyor belt, get to college and then get a degree and then go into the work environment. It's all about that. So anyway, I was kind of riding the conveyor belt around to get to my point. But the point is, that's what education has become, not what it should be.
Well,
it's not conducive to freedom.
Oh, there we go. I was looking up this quote by Frederick Bastiat. Let me see here. I almost have it here. Next one. Okay. Oh no, it must be a different one. Anyway, the basis of the quote, I believe it's from the Law, where he's talking about how you would not see people who were trying to get education before they had food, right? If the market was left unto itself, you would have people taking care of what was necessary. They wouldn't be worried about the social system trying to make sure that everybody was educated. And, some people look at that, I think, and say, well, education is the gateway to a better life, right? That's what it's been seen for generations.
Right.
But I think his point is very important, because it's saying, hey, no, it's education is important, but there is a hierarchy, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we need to make sure that some of the basic things are handled before we go for some of the greater things, even if that means we forego an education for a little while. Because you know what? If we forego an education, that doesn't mean we're not getting educated. It just means we're not getting this education, right? It's like what we talked about last week about W.E.B. Du Bois versus Booker T. Washington, where W.E.B. Du Bois said, okay, now we're free as blacks, Native or blacks, not Native Americans, but that we need to go and get in the highest, places. We need to go to Washington, D.C. We need to go to the centers of power and immediately jump in. And Booker T. Washington said, no, what we need to do is we need to learn how to be self-reliant and learn these basics. And when we learn these basics, then we'll be able to go to the next step. And there's another quote from John Adams where he said, basically that he practiced law and government and war so that his kids would be able to practice, whatever.
Could study mathematics and science.
Right. And so
that kind of
their
thing.
kids could study theater and whatever else. It was like he was laying the foundation, not just for him, but for generations to come. And when we're so short-sighted with our own education and say it's about our career, right? It's about finishing, getting the piece of paper so that we can go on. We have our right to education so that we can have our right to a good job. And it sets us up for failure. Even if we're successful, we're going to fail because we're not going to leave a legacy for future generations. Like all these other individuals who came before us set up a legacy for us to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, I want to share a quote that I love. Says, God created a free universe. He could have created any kind of universe he wanted, but a universe without freedom would have been static and meaningless. I think that's great. And then there's another quote about collectivism, which goes along with this. Collectivism doesn't work because it's based on a faulty economic premise. There is no such thing as a person's fair share of the wealth. That's a huge cry that we see all the time. But anyway, the gross national product is not a pizza that must be carefully divided, because if I get too many slices, you have to eat the box. The economy is expandable and, in any practical sense, limitless. And that's the thing you'd never hear about these race baiters talk about. You never hear from the government education. It's always, I took a microeconomics course in college, and it started off with resources are what do they always say? I'll come up with it. But natural resources are always limited. Therefore, the natural limitations on resources cause people to fight over them, essentially. I'll find that, though.
Well, while you're finding that, I found that quote by John Adams. I just wanted to read it for context. John Adams said this: I must study politics and war that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, and naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture in order to give their children the right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. In other words, saying we're laying the foundation for the next generation, so each generation has a greater amount of liberty in what they can choose. They can exercise their freedom to make choices that maybe are greater in luxury, in comfort, in whatever. We deal as parents and as individuals with some harsh decisions and conditions from time to time in order to make sure that our children are provided for, right? And hopefully set them up to be able to go on and do bigger and better, and don't set them up for failure because we tell them that rights come from government.
Well, and that's another thing that I think is important, and I think that Mr. Adams was kind of wrong. He was awesome in his early days, but he kind of got a little despotic in his old days. When he was freaking ornery. When he went to France and Franklin and Jefferson were there, he was just a sourpuss. Anyway, but the one thing that I think about the economic question is this. I found it. Scarcity is the fundamental economic problem of having seemingly unlimited human wants in a world of limited resources. It states that society has insufficient productive resources to fulfill all human wants and needs. That's what I was taught the first day of microeconomics in college, is that economics is a study of scarce resources. And the thing that I think it's so ridiculous is that you take 100 people and they're all different and they create a mini economy. Eventually, all the needs of the group will be met. Even if resources are limited, they will find a way to produce more resources or to change the technology to meet more people's needs with less expanded. Yeah. And so that's what I think is the big deal here, is that, and to go back to John Adams, I think Reagan was right. We are only one generation from losing freedom. So I like John Adams' sentiment, but it's not a reality in this world that every generation has to be preoccupied with liberty. And World War I and World War II, those generations were the ones that really started to buy into the narrative of freedom government started to craft about the people. That's when the Pledge of Allegiance came into being, and the flag, when we started to pledge allegiance to it. That's when government and the New Deal and all these things. And so when we let government take over the narrative of what freedom means, really we're losing liberty. I asked a friend once, Randall, it's a friend we both have, and I said, is there a difference between freedom and liberty? And he said, well, some people think it is and some people think it isn't. And I said, I think liberty is the ability or the agency that men have to act. Freedom is the condition with which liberty operates in. So if you take away people's freedom, it doesn't matter if they have the free will or the liberty to make choices. You've taken away the conditions that allow them to enjoy that. So that's my thing about freedom and liberty, and we always use them interchangeably, but I don't think they are. Education creates the enlightened liberty or agency, and then the freedom fighting creates the conditions to enjoy what we've learned, unless we've learned crap.
Well, even if we learned crap, we can still try and enjoy it, and we'll probably share it on Facebook, right? That's what happens.
Yeah, but we'll put lipstick on it and fire, and it'll look amazing.
Well, isn't that? I mean, I've always thought it was kind of interesting talking about education and then putting lipstick on things that are bad. I always thought it was funny that here you have individuals, sports. I never can really get sports. I've practiced and played in some of them, but you get an individual and we get so tribal, right? So either our high school or our college or our favorite sports team, whoever it is, we can even a lot of us can start to come to blows with someone just because they're wearing the T-shirt of an opposing team that we don't like, or the team did something bad last night. We don't like them. They beat our team, so we're going to go and fight over it. And
right.
That's one of the beauties of our current system. I think that it really ingrains that, even though, it's like, well, what's the difference between the teams? Well, they have a different colored jersey. Okay, is there any other real reason? Well, not really. They're still people, and they still take the ball and throw it or dribble it or do whatever. They do the same thing, and they both have amazing players on both teams, but who cares, because they have the wrong colored jersey. And I think it's funny because at the same time that we have people crying for equality of race and we should stop seeing color, we have all this underlying
what?
Well, we have this underlying urge in the market to discriminate completely based on color.
Yes.
with teams, we're always doing that. But then the political correctness police are out there saying, no, you can't say this, you can't say that, you got to do this, you got to act this way towards this group or this way towards that group. It's like, no, you don't. This is just like all the issues that we were talking about that come on the news. You don't have to worry about all those little picky details. What you need to do is treat all individuals as equals. Done.
Yeah.
Then you get over that.
Well, one thing I was going to say is that we've lost our Americanism, meaning individualism. And I think individualism gets a bad rap because a lot of people tie that to objectivists like Ayn Rand and others I'm thinking of. But individualism really meant fundamentally back when you didn't have a safety net, I'm responsible for me. I have to take care of me and my own. But now it's like, here's another quote. The whole idea of government is this: if enough people get together and act in concert, they can take something and not pay for it. And like you said, the teams, the blue and the red teams, thank you, PJ O'Rourke. I'm sounding like a genius reading his quotes. But if you talk about the red versus the blue team, like he said earlier, the blue team, the Democrats are all about, we need to get government to do more and to take on more responsibility for the people. While the red team says, no, that never works, and they get in office and they do essentially the same thing to a little bit lesser extent. So that's where collectivism really fails us on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, is that people don't realize that, well, there's no such thing as collective rights. And a group doesn't have any kind of special rights at all. And when you hear this term collective bargaining, fundamentally people can bargain collectively, but government cannot give them any power or distinction based on collective rights. And we're in a huge mess because of this. And that's why families have disintegrated and we move away from each other. We don't live together when we're old. It's just like we don't take care of our own because we don't have to nowadays.
Yeah, that used to be the real true workers union, was the family. We worked together, we supported each other, we did things to help make sure the family, survived day to day, week to week, month to month, and we eviscerated that. Our society, we just let it go, and we said, okay, well, and a lot of that was because of what we're talking about, education. And we talked about this, I think, last week on the show as well, where, you had all these GIs that came back from World War II, and then you had the GI Bill so they could go get educated. And so there was this influx of funds into the schools. There was this influx of technical high-end training. And then all of a sudden, one, the individual who'd just gone to war and seen all places all over the world, and then two, had a college degree, their parents were probably saying, no, don't come back here. Go make something of yourself, because we've been okay, but we've just been making it year to year, right? Go make something of yourself. Leave the town, or the individual said, well, I'm not going back home. I'm going to make something of myself, right? One or the other typically happened. And so that allowed for this destruction of that family cocoon, so to speak, where the family lived generation after generation on the family farm or the family business or whatever. They did the same thing, and they took over from father to son and father to son. And
wasn't there a bit of pride or a lot of pride in that? It's the family farm, it's the family business.
Well, you still see that. You'll have companies that are like family owned for 150 years, on their label or whatever. And those companies are fewer and further between. But anyway, so we had all these rights of education given to the people. And it really upset the balance that was giving them the most freedom, which was their ability to choose the direction and have complete control over their lives and their livelihoods. They ended up being employees of companies that at that point in time, you'd have company loyalty and people would stay on for, decades and decades and retire from the same company they got their first job with. Now it's much worse. You plan on having a decent amount of churn, especially in the technology or whatever.
You have to.
Yeah,
well,
you're going to lose people.
I've got a friend who owns 5 restaurants, and he told me his actual percentage over several years, he knows what it is, and he's always working to reduce that churn. But a lot of his employees are Hispanic, and they tend to be dependable. Americans, I think it's just, I guess it's a natural cause of the fame generation and the digital generation. We all want to skip things. And Randall, we've been at this for decades, in the political game. We've been working hard on this, and it's starting to pay off a little bit. But man, it's a decade. So if you said to me 10 years ago, hey, you'll make some money or eventually you'll be successful, you just got to give it 10 years.
Right.
Like, what? I got a nice quote, though. Mr. O'Rourke, he won't let us down. He says, the free market is not a creed or an ideology that political conservatives, libertarians, and Ayn Rand acolytes want Americans to take on faith. The free market is simply a measurement. The free market tells us what people are willing to pay for a given thing at a given moment. That's all the free market does. The free market is a bathroom scale. We may not like what we see, but we can't pass a law making us weigh 165. liberals and leftists think we can. So he's admitting that the free market is kind of amoral or reflection of the morality of the people that participate in it, while liberals and leftists are, they're out in la land. They're out in utopia, to reference it earlier.
With their government internet.
So, yeah, absolutely. So that's the thing. You just have to look at these things in not in a bubble, or with the side that, well, just sounds good. And that's the thing, Randall. Why have we become a nation where we just go with things that sound or feel good? Why aren't people listening to Pyrolitical more? We got it all figured out. I'm sick of this crap.
People want it easy. And they think that easy is also good. Easy's not also good. The easier it is, the further you want to run. I think if you're a self-reliant individual, you're and being successful. Like, there's all these get-rich-quick schemes out there. There's all this garbage. Ultimately, at the end of the day, determined, responsible individual who tries to build their own business or tries to grow it from the ground up, they're going to fight. It's going to hurt. It's going to be painful. There's going to be difficulties. But all those things grow the individual into the individual who can be worthy of those blessings. Is it any wonder that someone who's built, scrimped and saved and fought and been bloodied by business, and built something amazing is not really excited to try and give up more money to the government or give up whatever. They want control. They want control because they fought for it. They've earned it.
Well, here's the reality. Jesus Christ said we would always have the poor among us, which is a blessing in a way because we're able to share our blessings from God, our material blessings. But the thing that's so tough is that life is hard. If you ask anyone, life is hard. I don't care what category they're in. I have heard, like Grant Cardone or Les Brown said, that money can't buy happiness, but it's a heck of a down payment. But honestly, from middle class to lower class, you're going to find that universally people think life is hard. But here's the deal. If life is hard in a dystopian, tyrannical, what do they say, human cattle pen, and it is the same when we're not in that pen and we're just subject to the free market, then you just say, well, life's hard, period. Let's just live in freedom and do what we may and let people live and let live. And I also remembered this. I looked up one time the definition of utopia. It's Latin for roughly translates into no place. There's no such thing as utopia. Maybe when the Lord returns, we'll see what that's like. But utopia is Latin for no place. And that's the thing. So we decided to live in a irrational no place where government intervenes in everything and we're completely miserable, instead of living in freedom where it's hard, but yet there is some kind of there's ties to the family property, the family business. We stay close. We own more land, more businesses. That seems like a lot better deal than the no place called government.
Well, as we wind down here, we're almost at the top of the hour. Can you believe it? I just wanted to close with a quote from a mutual friend. He's a psychologist, and he says when people are faced with a trial, a tragedy, a death of a family member, a setback at work or whatever, most people say, well, why me? Why did this happen to me? And he said it's so unempowering to say that, because it's just despair. He said what he likes to say is, why not me? Right? This is going to happen to somebody. Well, why shouldn't it happen to me? And it gives you an opportunity to reflect and say, where am I going to go from here? Right? What am I going to do as a result of it, rather than just being a victim in the situation? And so thank you for listening. Let's not be victims. Let's be agents. Let's go. Let's use our true freedoms to exercise our true rights and not just feel empowered, but be successful as we fight for liberty.
Hey, and go over to Pyrolitical Live on YouTube and subscribe and click that little bell.
Take care.